Hello everybody, my name is Jared and today we're going to be doing a video that's a little bit different on my channel. Today's video is going to be a cosplay talk video. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to explain through a theme of cosplay from the most basic level all the way up to as professional as I feel comfortable talking. I've been cosplaying for over 10 years. I'm not a professional cosplayer by any stretch of the imagination, but I have experience in quite a few different materials and different ways to create costumes and plan costumes, and I'm hoping that my experience can help some people. Now, this idea has been around on the internet for a little while. It's basically just going to be me talking through different elements of cosplay in the most basic level and then sort of progressing a little bit as I go on in the series to talk about more detailed things like competitive cosplay, armor creation, pattern making, that kind of thing. In this episode, I will be talking about the process of choosing an appropriate costume. When I say appropriate, I don't mean I'm going to police how you cosplay or who you cosplay. I'm going to talk you through what my process is for deciding whether I'm going to cosplay something and to what and what I'm going to use it for and so on. Now, the first thing I always consider when I'm working on a costume or I'm planning a costume is what is it going to be worn for? What I mean by this is, does it fit into one of my 3 categories that I always separate my costumes into? These categories are, is it competition appropriate? Is it convention appropriate? Or is it just photo shoot appropriate? Now, I'm going to elaborate on what I mean by all of those things. Competition appropriate, aka appropriate for a masquerade or a cosplay competition, means that the costume is going to hit a different level of difficulty. Competitions usually involve a walk-on or a performance or skit, and they require a little bit more process gone into your costume, as well as the costume itself being a little bit more detailed and a little bit more elaborate, a bit more special. These performances are usually in front of a live judge panel and an audience, and this could be anything from a very small audience to a very large one depending on the convention. And the judges can actually sometimes also be celebrities. I will go into more detail on the competition element of cosplay in a later video. This one is just going to be about planning your costumes, but know that when you're planning a costume that's going to be for a specific competition, you're going to need a different level of difficulty. I always save my more elaborate costumes, or what I would call my showstopper costumes, for competitions. So stuff like if you're going to make the proper robot version of Genji from Overwatch, that would be suitable for a competition. But characters like perhaps Kai Chisaki, who I've got a makeup tutorial for, characters like him probably wouldn't be suitable for a competition unless you figured out some way to maybe use his quirk or something like that. A lot of costumes can be made appropriate for competition, but it pretty much depends on exactly how much detail you put in and the different elements that you can show in your costume. Now, convention is a lot more obvious. Convention means that you can walk around a convention floor with this costume. I honestly believe you can wear anything to a convention, and that's totally fine. Me personally, I tend to save the costumes that are going to be recognisable for conventions and comfortable enough for me to walk in. By recognisable, I mean characters from Boku no Hero and things like that, Naruto, anything that's going to be recognised by at least one person at the convention, I would usually wear to a con. Also, costumes that just stand out from the crowd. While they're not that complicated, stuff like Gravity Falls a lot of people really liked because the colours were really bright and it was very popular. I also usually avoid wearing costumes that involve enormous parts of my costume, so stuff like Hawks from Boku no Hero manga, I would not wear walking around a convention, but I could wear him for a competition. And finally, of those sections, photo shoots. Photo shoots can be for literally any costume, and I try and get a photo shoot done of every single costume I do, but what I mean by just a photo shoot costume is a costume that I wouldn't wear to a convention and I wouldn't compete. A good example of that is any of the children from It. While they're a really, really cool cosplay and they have a massive fan base online, when you're walking around a convention, people probably aren't going to be able to recognise that you're just dressed up as an 80s teenager. There are ways to make things more recognisable for conventions. Like I did say, if I was going to wear Eddie from It to a convention, I would make his cast and carry bling. That's a good way to signify things like that if you do really want to wear a costume like that. And again, you can, just if you want to, but I personally prefer to save those for just doing photo shoots, specifically location shoots. Another example of that is stuff like obscure 90s or 2000s cartoons. When looking at wearing a costume to a convention, I always think of the following things because it has definitely damaged my convention experience not thinking about these before. Weather. This is a huge one, and I've made a massive mistake this time for a convention that I'm not going to be doing again. Wearing a costume that is incredibly heavy, a lot of layers, and very, very warm is not going to be fun in a convention where it's likely to be over 30 degrees. I'm going to be wearing Kai Chisaki from Boku no Hero to a convention where we've been having a heat wave in England, meaning that in London it is probably going to be over 30 degrees, and I will be wearing a suit shirt, a bomber jacket with an enormous fur and a beak, and I'm not looking forward to that at all. I am sorry if you can hear any noises, by the way. We sometimes have people slamming doors and things. We're in an apartment complex, so sorry about that. Vice versa, if you're going to a convention and it is going to be absolutely freezing, maybe save the bikini cosplays for a different convention, because I just don't want you to freeze to death. My bombshell Harley definitely could not go to any convention that was maybe in November. No, I'd freeze. I also find out if the convention is an indoor or outdoor convention. By that I mean, is the majority of the convention going to be held indoors or outdoors? I know that sounds really obvious, but I've been to conventions where most of the time you do actually spend all of your time socialising outside. And stuff like London MCM is a really good one for that, because a lot of people do socialise on the grass. This convention is not going to be fun if it is likely to rain and you're wearing a costume that can be damaged by rain. If you're wearing an outfit that could be furthered by rain, so you do a character that maybe is involved in a lot of rain, or it would actually enhance your photo shoot opportunities, by all means do it. But I always try and make sure that my costumes are going to be appropriate for the kind of experience I'm going to be in the convention. And again, air conditioning really helps on those really hot conventions. Busyness! I'm going to bring back a convention I've just mentioned, London MCM. This convention is possibly the busiest convention I've been to. It is always incredibly busy, and it can be a little bit hell if you're trying to walk around again with giant wings or dressed in an enormous suit of armour, like stuff like Al from Full Metal Alchemist. It also needs to be considered stuff like, does your dress you're wearing have a train, or do you have an enormous tail? Do you have something sticking out of your back that means you can't turn around? If it's a really busy convention, maybe save that for a quieter one. Age appropriate. Now, I don't like to be the guy who polices what people wear to different conventions. I definitely don't mean that, and if you want to wear something, by all means do it. I just always consider whether or not my sexy cosplays are suitable for a convention that's going to be mostly attended by children. Stuff like, I wouldn't wear Bombshell Harley to something like MCM Manchester, because MCM Manchester is absolutely full of children, and I wouldn't feel comfortable walking around in basically a bra and booty shorts around those kind of guests. You totally could, and by all means a lot of people do. It's just my own personal comfort, so that's something I thought I'd mention in here. Things to also consider in that bracket is your costume that is incredibly violent looking appropriate for children also? If there's going to be people who are maybe like 5 and around that age at a convention, having a costume where you've got an enormous hole in your face and stuff like that might be a little bit scary to the little kids, and I try and consider that, especially because my job actually does tie into working with children. And finally, what kind of convention is it? Conventions come in all types and all sizes, but particularly conventions can come in stuff like comics, manga, and film. I tend to save my manga cosplays for manga conventions, and I tend to save my film cosplays for film conventions, and so on. That's just really mainly to help me with stuff like, are there going to be location things or shoots that I can do really appropriately? Will I find other convention cosplayers who are also doing the same thing as me? And will I also be recognised at the con? Because it's always nice to have people go, ooh, that's a character I know. And again, you don't have to follow any of these rules. And again, I really wouldn't call them rules, they're just tips for if you're struggling to decide on what costume to wear to what. So you've decided what it's for. Now you have to pick a character. This is the really fun bit. My first thing I do when I'm deciding a character I want to cosplay is I think about the series and characters that I absolutely adore, and I'll make a big old list of just those. So I'll have stuff like, I love this series, I love this character design, I love this character, and I'll write down every single instance of those, even if I don't feel like I'd cosplay them, just so that I know in future these are costumes that I was really interested in. Then I think about, would I personally feel comfortable in this? There have been exceptions to this, like my Bombshell Harley cosplay, but I honestly tend to not do costumes where my entire stomach is out. There's not any enormous reason for that, it's just my own personal comfort. I don't like having my stomach out, and I'm not a huge fan of the way my body looks when it's completely out. But other people are way more confident than me, and they can pull off maybe cosplays that are a little skimpier. So, when I'm deciding on a costume, I look at how comfortable I currently feel about myself and how comfortable I would be feeling wearing this costume. It's always fun to push your comfort zones and things like that, but definitely don't push yourself out of your comfort zone completely. And then I look at my own skill. I have experience in a few different things. When I first started cosplay, I had zero experience in anything. I couldn't sew, I didn't even have any idea how one would even edit a t-shirt. But over time, I taught myself different techniques by learning them slowly as I go along. So what I would recommend when you're first starting out is find costumes where you can buy the majority of the costume, or at least buy the entire thing, because then you can also look at the seams and things like that and how it was actually made. I always recommend a lot of characters from stuff like side characters from Kingdom Hearts is a really good one, 90s cartoon characters, ones like Naruto where you can buy the entire costumes online, or Boku no Hero again for the same thing. Those costumes are really good for baby start-out cosplayers, because it means that you can actually get a little bit more experience of understanding the costume and making little tiny details and edits without actually having to jump full on into making the ball gown. You can learn these things as you go along, and I definitely recommend pushing yourself every single time to see if you can learn a new technique with your new costume. Start small, build your skills. Time. Time is a big one. If you have a week for a convention, please don't try and make a giant mech suit. Like, we've all done stuff like that. My young skin of Genji, I actually put together in 2 weeks. And I really regret that, because there's a lot of things I could have made a lot better that I didn't because I was rushing the whole thing. And every single cosplayer probably knows the suffering of con crunch and leaving things till last minute. Just allow yourself a little bit more extra time so that you can actually finish your costumes to a standard that you're feeling comfortable in. And cost. Cost is a really big one, especially if you don't have an enormous amount of income or savings. And again, please don't let cosplay eat into your savings too much, because savings are important and we are all striving to be good grown-ups as we go along. And please choose living well over that expensive fabric. And finally, I think about who I would be with in this costume. I like to do group and couple cosplays. I don't really do solo cosplays on my own that often, but with cosplaying in a group or a couple, it can complicate things. I'm going to talk about this properly in another separate video, but there are issues that would come up for a group costume that wouldn't come up for a solo one, and vice versa. So just think before you jump straight into a big cosplay group, because there can be a lot of pressure that comes from a cosplay group. So this is a brief introduction on how I choose a costume. The next episode will be starting on planning a cosplay, so actually start on the process of making costumes. Thank you very much for watching, and for this video I would like to ask you, what is your favourite cosplay you've ever made? And for new cosplayers who've never made one before, what will be your first cosplay? Thank you very much, and as always, please remember to be creepy.